person, but we're so glad you could join us virtually. So obviously today, the Democratic Women of Monterey County, we've officially pivoted and moved our programming online. This is our first online event, so please be patient with us if we have any technical difficulties. Oh, excuse me one moment. Like I'm having right now. We do have several elected officials with us here today. We have Seaside City Council member Dave Pacheco, Monterey Peninsula Water Management District Board member George Riley, Jacqueline Simon with the North Monterey County Fire Protection District, and she's also a board member, and Regina Gage, who's a Salinas Valley Memorial Hospital trustee, also a board member, and Council member Lisa Berkeley with the City of Marina, also a board member. And if I missed anyone, I apologize. You're welcome to message me and I will try to get them mentioned later today. But again, we're online today. It's our first time, so bear with us. So hopefully this will be the first of several virtual events that we'll be hosting while we're sheltering in place. Our most important online event that I want to make sure everybody has the information for will be our annual sustainability event, which we are taking online this year. We're planning a very special event honoring State Senator Bill Monning and Supervisor Jane Parker. So I hope you can mark your calendars for Sunday, October 4th. And again, that will be online and more information will be forthcoming, but just want to make sure everybody has that date since, of course, we want to honor our spectacular state senator and very special supervisor. Also want to keep your eyes out for our non-event fundraiser coming up in early June, which I hope you agree is a really good year to do our non-event. We've been doing it for years, so I guess others can take note from us. But this is the event where we tell you not to attend. You just attend from home. But we hope that you could still support us. It's still an election year and a very important election year. So please do look out for that event and continue to support us. We also want to make sure that your membership is current. So, you know, despite moving online, we still do offer our speakers honorariums. And so that's important to us to keep our membership robust and to keep going with our mission. So if you want to visit Member Planet to check out the status of your membership and renew for 2020, please do so. And if you have any questions about that, you could contact our membership chair. Her name is Lisa Ziska-Mershand. And you can email her also at membership@dw-mc.org. Or you can always contact any of us that you feel comfortable with, and we're always happy to help you walk you through that. Lastly, one of our club members, Marlene Martin, is running for Monterey Peninsula College Board of Trustees, and she is on the lookout for a campaign manager right now. So if you know someone who's able to help Marlene, or if you're able to help her, please let her know. If you don't know Marlene, you can email Kate, our president, at president@dw-mc.org, and she'll put you in touch with Marlene, or again, you can get in contact with any of us and we'll help put you in contact with her. So now without further ado, again, I just want to say it's so great to see everybody. I wish we could be seeing each other in person, but you know, I don't know, my hair is not looking like it should be seen in person these days. But we do look forward to when we get to do that. But hopefully this will be just the first of very many successful events. I'm going to turn it over to our board member, Lisa Berkeley, who's going to walk us through the format of today's program and discuss all the technological aspects of how everything works. And she can help troubleshoot, and so can I during this whole thing. So Lisa, take it away.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay, so first of all, thank you all for getting here. This says that we've had some good technology success as a place to begin. And what I just want to go through with you are some basics around Zoom. Maybe you're already familiar with them, but we're just going to run through. So hopefully you were able to see everyone in the beginning through the gallery view. The gallery view is on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. You'll see it'll either say gallery view or speaker view. And if you want to see everybody, you'll be in gallery view. When there's a specific speaker, you want to press on speaker view so that you'll be able to see just that person. Also, as you may notice, you are all muted right now, and that's how we're going to keep it until the Q&A session. The Q&A session will be for about half an hour after Ravel speaks. And during that time, you'll be able to raise your hand. Now, the way you raise your hand is you go to your dashboard, which should be probably at the bottom or side of your screen. And down in the bottom, you'll see a list of something called participants. You click on the participants and a pop-up box will show up. You'll see your name. You'll see the possibility to raise hand or unmute yourself. You'll be using those for the Q&As. And so once you raise your hand, I will call on you when it's your turn. Please ask your question. Try to keep it simple and direct. And then please unmute yourself again. And we're keeping it to one question per person. Let's see, what else can we tell you? This event is being recorded and we will be sharing it on our DWMC website and as well as probably our Facebook page. And I think that that's it. Any other, and if you have any questions now, actually, if you have any questions now, please raise your hand about technology or anything. Give you a minute to try that out. Okay, I don't see any raised hands, so I'm assuming we're in good shape. Without further ado then, I am going to turn this over to Kate Daniels, and thank you. Oh, and also, if you have any questions and need help in your email, you'll see Nicole Hollingsworth's phone number. Thank you. Okay.
Yay, thank you, Lisa, and welcome everyone. This is certainly different than what we usually do, but I am standing. What you don't see is I'm actually standing in front of my laundry machine, but it kind of feels like the podium and the lectern, so I can feel like we're actually in the room together and having a Democratic Women of Monterey County luncheon event. As always, this is going to be a fabulous event in terms of the level of information and the quality of information and really the importance and the relevance of the information that we're going to get today. So I just really appreciate everybody pivoting like we pivoted to try to create and continue our important programming in light of the shelter in place. So I just really appreciate you all showing up and bearing with us with the technology. And it's just great that we all get to be together here today. So thank you. I did notice when I was walking through what Lisa was sharing with us that we do have a couple more elected officials. I see that Gail Morton is on this list, who is Marina City Council member. Thank you for being here, Gail. And we have Anna Velasquez, who is a Soledad City Council member. So thank you both. And I hope I didn't miss anybody else. Again, if we did, bear with us and we apologize in advance. But thank you all for coming and welcome to the other two elected officials that we didn't have the chance to recognize when Nicole was speaking earlier. So for those of you who know me, money in politics is something that I care a lot about. I am not on the program committee. This event is brought to you by our fabulous program committee. They do such a good job every year figuring out who to invite to speak and creating such a great lineup. And this is the first one that we're able to move online, and I think it works perfectly in this format. You all are in for a real treat hearing from Ann Ravel today. But money in politics, it's something that the Democratic Women of Monterey County think a lot about. It's something that we care a lot about. They really don't mix. Money has no business in politics. And with the changes that have occurred over the years, in particular since Citizens United, we have this new element of both dark and what they call gray money. Dark money being money that is groups who are able to keep their donors secret, gray money being groups who disclose some of their donors, but not all. Or sometimes what we see right here in Monterey County, which is they disclose and they're completely open about who they are and what they're doing. And unfortunately, they have a lot of influence when it comes to decisions that are being made and priorities. You know, it's budget season all over our county, in every jurisdiction, and in the state of California. And often, you know, what gets valued and prioritized has to do with who has influence and power. So this topic is one that's dear to all of our heart, and we hope that we can make some headway soon to create the kind of change that's needed so our elections are really free and really fair. Today's speaker has been a tireless leader working for fair elections and to get money's influence, excuse me, in particular dark money, out of politics. She's been a public service leader fighting for justice and equality her entire life. I was surprised to see in reading her bio that her early work life started right here in the Salinas Valley, picking fruit. I am sure that had some influence on her in terms of the social justice direction that her life has taken. She went to UC Berkeley as an undergrad and went to law school at UC Hastings, and had an active career as an attorney before being appointed to the Fair Political Practices Commission by Governor Brown, and later to the Federal Election Commission by President Obama. She is currently running for state senate. It's always wonderful to have an active person on the campaign trail joining us. We do, as you all know, thanks to your support, we are able to provide a stipend, honorarium to every speaker who comes to speak at our luncheons. And so that honorarium of $250 will go directly to Ann's campaign. District 15 is just north of us, and she's running for the state senate. And so without me saying any more, I am really excited to welcome Ann Ravel to discuss the impact of dark money and social media on our elections. So thank you, Ann.
Thank you so much, Kate. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody who I can't see for being here. And I would love to come back when I get my hair cut and look more normal. But I'm really glad to be here today. I thought I'd start a little bit by giving a brief background about why the disclosure of money in politics is so important and how it came about. And really it wasn't until, I mean, there's obviously been a lot of issues about money in politics ever since the early 1900s. I mean, President Roosevelt, after taking a lot of corporate money, renounced it and said how terrible it was and what a terrible impact it had on elections. And then there were some laws enacted, but it wasn't until after Watergate, which many people don't realize Watergate was in essence a campaign finance issue, because money in bags, literally in bags, went to the cash, went to the White House to help pay for the burglars. And when that finally came out after the scandal, people said, you know, this is kind of outrageous because the money not only came from foreign donors, and of course, foreign donors have always been illegal in US campaigns, but it also came from big corporate interests that were trying to influence tax benefits and other things. And so that scandal created enough of a, momentum for there to be some more disclosure about who's behind campaigns. And that resulted in the McCain-Feingold Act, which kind of was whittled back a little bit by the Supreme Court, but the issue of disclosure of expenditures, disclosure about who's behind giving those contributions is really central to campaign finance law. And the reason is, and I think you all know this, I'm sure, but even the Supreme Court in Citizens United said, it's really important for people to know, because then they can weigh the issues, they can be more informed about who's behind things and make decisions based on that. And honestly, being active as you all are in political issues, that can't happen unless people have information. And information helps people have the trust in the political system, as well as the tools to vote. What many have studied, social scientists and political scientists have talked about, that lack of transparency often leads to total disassociation from the political process and even from the community, and then people don't vote. And it's really interesting because most Americans, whether they be Republicans or Democrats, are very concerned, as Kate said she was, about the campaign finance system and how much you need to have reform of that system. In fact, 76% of Americans of both parties say that government is run by a few big interests who are just looking out for themselves. And 75% of Americans say that they feel voiceless and powerless, and that is across party lines. And there's very clear evidence that when you have higher trust in government, you definitely will have more voter turnout, more participation. And low trust, it's basically a challenge, to the effectiveness of what we have, which is a representative democracy that assumes that citizens should participate and take an active role in public discussion and political life. So it's kind of amazing how central the issue of disclosure is, and what the problems are in our system that come from that lack of disclosure, and in particular, dark money. And that it's been said by many people, I didn't come up with this clever statement, but it's true, that in campaigns, the only people who are in the dark about who's behind campaigns are the voters. The candidates all know. And I can tell you from my experiences running for office, there's no question about it, because while independent expenditures and any expenditures by super PACs or dark money groups are not supposed to be ever coordinated, according to Citizens United, coordinated with the candidates, it's not as if you're not told that they're going to do them. So you know very well that they are. So the candidates know who's behind those communications. People don't know. And in addition to sort of having that effect on voter turnout and how voters feel confident about our electoral process, which I think is hugely important in our country. The problem with dark money as well is the people who are promulgating those communications, doing those ads, are accountable to no one. When a candidate themselves has an ad, people know who to hold accountable if they don't agree, if they think they're inflammatory or lying or any other problem with them. People know where to go and who to be upset at. When it's a company or a PAC or some group that's called, this is the name of the group, of the dark money group that I went after when I was at the FPPC, that gave $15 million in California right before an election, 2 weeks before an election, to defeat Governor Brown's tax measure and to give money in favor of a sort of anti-union measure. They were called the Center to Protect Patients' Rights. And when we at the FPPC looked into them, we realized, number one, and this was after litigation, we realized, for one thing, they had absolutely nothing to do with patients' rights. I mean, they had nothing to do with anybody's rights, in fact. They were just one of many Koch brothers groups that were used to funnel money from place to place, essentially money laundering, so that the original donors' names would not be divulged to the public. And so that permits people who do want to play in politics, who have a really strong interest and give millions of dollars to influence politics, are able to do it without ever being disclosed. And those things are are mainly the problems with dark money. But we know too that because of that falsity and that anonymity, a lot of people are angry. There's been a lot of polls done that show that people are really, really upset at the tenor of inflammatory ads, but they have no one to blame. And so many people don't vote as well. And you'll notice there's a little thread through all of this, because I think all of these things lead to voter suppression in the campaign finance arena. And these are things that people say, you know, we don't want to vote because it's so nasty and everybody's so nasty. Well, you know, and people don't like the polarization and the anger. And that causes them not to come out to vote. And that is really problematic for, particularly for us Democrats. It's really a problem. So I think that we have to do something about this dark money, and particularly now, these days, it needs to be done also on the internet, because you have to realize there is lots of dark money on the internet. The internet has any ads on the internet, there is no requirement, as there are for ads that take place on any other media, on TV stations and the radio. And in California, there's a little more requirements, but there's very little, and federally, of any requirement that there be disclosure about who's behind particular communications, which was led to open season, really, for foreign actors. And we know there were lots of foreign ads that were placed in the 2016 election. And they were very bold and pretty outrageous that Russia directly actually purchased them. But that's not going to happen again, because we now know. But it doesn't matter, because they're able to do it through other mechanisms as well. I mean, that was another really big use of dark money in the 2016 and the 2018 elections. And in fact, it was used even to try to influence people during the Kavanaugh nomination, where either groups are set up on Facebook or on Twitter that really are from either foreign groups or internal right-wing groups often. And those groups don't ever have to disclose who they are. They're set up as, you know, like their friends' Facebook groups, but they're not. And as much as Facebook has done, or as little as they have done, it doesn't it hasn't impacted this at all. It is still continuing to this day. And I will say, I mean, I'm going to get into the issues of what went on with the 2016 election and the 2018 election as well. But I just want to also sort of, if it's not scary enough, to say that the FBI has said that, and this is one of the directors of the FBI who looks into these issues, has said, 2016 was really just a dry run for 2020. And that is absolutely correct, because not just with Russian intervention, not just with Chinese intervention, not just with Iranian intervention, but also the people that's called homegrown groups that also are going to be able to place these kinds of ads that are not ads, they're more like issue ads, so they're not paying for it, they're making it look like it is organic advertising or issues that are being posted by Americans or by a lot of people. And it really is not. It's a concerted effort at propaganda and at influencing the election. But I will get into that a little more right now, which is, I mean, what actually happened in 2016 was shocking. If any of you have even taken a look at either the Mueller report or the state or the U.S. Senate's investigation on this, what we know is that while it wasn't really fake news that people seem to like to say about it, it was really humans and bots that pushed it out to spread a lot of deception, a lot of propaganda, clearly political, through various other social and political groups. And the effort was without a doubt politically related and related to the idea of impacting the election. We know then that much of it came from Russian government agencies, but sort of back to the discussion, which is kind of important, I think, about voter suppression. Much of it was intended for voter suppression, and we know now Facebook and some of the other platforms are trying to deal with some of the more clear aspects of voter suppression, but what they're doing is not enough, because what we know that they were doing, in particular in minority communities, Black communities, Latino communities, communities of LGBTQ, and also younger people, was they were being told that you can text your vote, or that the voting date was really not that date, or that your place to vote is actually not the one you thought it was somewhere else. All things that were clear, straightforward misinformation for the purpose of making sure that people didn't vote. But there was also an enormous amount of deceptive statements and communications and propaganda that was also micro-targeted to those communities. And many of those communities, I know a lot of people know already about micro-targeting and how it's used, and it's always been used in campaigns. But in 2016, it was used, instead of micro-targeting so that a candidate could get their name out more, less expensively, and be able to give their political communications to people who they thought would be likely voters. This is so finely tuned that they were able to target geographically. And so much of the communications in 2016 that were done, for example, to gun owners or to people who were anti-immigrants based on what they had said already in their Facebook pages, or they were targeting largely the Black community and others in swing states. And it, according to Kathleen Hall Jameson, if any of you are interested, she wrote a book about this, and all the other interventions in the 2016 election. She thinks that it made the difference. It made the difference because these were states where there was, the electoral college vote that could have changed, that was changed based on a very small number of votes. So, it's very clear that what was also sent in particular to the Black community was not to vote at all because of false reasons. So there was a lot of information that was sent about Hillary that was totally false, videos that were doctored, totally false, saying how much she and the Democratic Party hated African Americans and all the terrible things they'd done to them, which resulted in 8% of African Americans fewer than in the previous election who voted. And while people say, well, that's because it was Hillary and not Obama, I don't think that there's evidence to that. People really believe that the political scientists who've looked at this believe that a large percentage of them were influenced by that communication online. I mean, we know that the way that micro-targeting is done now is so precise, and they're so capable of doing it, and they still do it on Facebook and other media. But it has been said that Facebook actually keeps more information on the American public about things from voting rolls, things from, they know who your friends are, so they have data about your friends. They know who's liking things, so they have data on that. They know very nuanced, subtle things about every one of us based on what we like, and they keep information with respect to that. And it's been said that Facebook actually has far more data on each and every one of us than the United States government has on us, which is quite astounding. And in terms of, for example, going after the Black community, there were several in 2016 fake accounts on Facebook. The most prominent one was called Blacktivist, and that was actually a Russian IRA account that was set up, and they had more followers, many more followers than Black Lives Matter. And that was really the center for showing a lot of false information to the African American community for the purpose of disenfranchising them. The Russian Internet Research Agency had 2,700 fake Twitter accounts and 80,000 Facebook posts in 2016. In total, they had an audience, not just on Facebook, and that doesn't include YouTube or any of the other media. They had an audience of 126 million Americans. Now, That is stunning when you think about the fact that in 2016, 137 million Americans voted in that election. So the huge predominant numbers received information from Russia about voting and about how not to vote. So other than, and it's interesting, let me also refer you to, there was because a lot of people say, oh, it had no influence, it's just more speech. Actually, there was a study done at Ohio University, and they interviewed Democrats about social media and the false information on social media and about how it influenced their vote. And the people who believed the false information on social media about, I'd say, I don't know the number right off the top of my head, but the ones who believed it, something like 70% of them did not vote for Hillary. And of the ones who didn't believe it, more than it was probably an equal number that did vote for Hillary. So people are clearly and were clearly in that election influenced very much by the disinformation that was on social media in 2016. And we saw the effects of it as well in 2018. So this is a topic that I could go on for, hours. So I'll stop there, but I'll say also that we now are seeing it again, and we're seeing it in a somewhat different format. The format is when all the disinformation that is on the internet that you all have probably read about relating to the coronavirus, much of that is actually political. There is a clear connection that's drawn between some of the things that are being promulgated on the internet, and because of the ability to keep spreading it out so fast, and the responses can't be done as quickly, and people already believe it by the time they see it. But it's not just things like, oh, you can use the chloroquine that Trump is saying and you're going to be fine, or you can think that all of this came from Asians and from China, and that Asians in America are at fault for this and spreading it. And one of my favorites, which is that the only people who are susceptible to the virus are people who are not God-fearing Americans. Things like that, but also, things that so clearly come from the Trump administration and the things that Trump says on publicly that then gets promulgated out. And a lot of that is, for example, that this is all fake news, and it's all the deep state that is making it up. And so that is one way to connect with his attacks on the public employees and the IGs and others in the federal government. And as it gets promulgated out, it causes people to act. And we know that there have been far more attacks on Asians. And he, in one of his news conferences, actually attacked an Asian reporter in, referring to his ethnicity. And those are things that then get pushed out on the internet as why this coronavirus response is wrong, and why the decisions that are being made are wrong by local entities. And in fact, we know, well, I understand, frankly, why people are feeling fed up at being stuck at home, and people who have to do their Zoom calls in front of their washing machine. And, I mean, I understand it, but we know also that all of these people who are showing up with guns in Michigan at their state house to go after their very thoughtful, reasonable governor, that is all spread through social media, and they're making false allegations, like allegations that 5G is related to the virus. So these are all not only they're not only dangerous to the public health, but they're extremely dangerous to our democracy, because we have an election coming up. And now is the time that people are starting to think about, what's going to happen in 2020. And because of what happened in 2016 and to some degree in 2018 as well, I am very concerned about what the outcome of the election will be, because if anything, there is far more of this right-wing vitriol that is being spread on the internet that is intertwined with information about the coronavirus, and people believe it. People believe it. And, there's always been a big worry about the deep fakes. And the deep fakes, as you probably know, people talked about it as a deep fake, but it wasn't, but about Nancy Pelosi slurring her speech and being drunk and stuff like that. And actually it was, they just slowed down the image. But there is the capability of, we know now, of having videos that are totally false, but they're so good and so accurate that it will look, even to a person who's not as susceptible, but many are susceptible, it will look like it's the real thing, when in fact it is not. And so it's possible to actually have somebody's way of speaking. Mine will all have my hands all over the place, and how their inflection and just everything perfectly, because it's so sophisticated now. And the platforms have talked about trying to figure out ways to detect them, but they still don't have the capability of doing that very well. And that is also another scary thing, because, clearly mixed in with the politics of this all, given some of the things that are being said and they've already tried them on Biden on a few ways that they've manipulated his statements and mixed them together. But it's a very difficult thing to detect, and that's why people have to be particularly astute and looking out for it, and being making sure that you don't believe these things, because if they seem like they're too inflammatory and crazy, they are. There is no question that they are. These things are coming from a lot of groups that also, by the way, exist still on Facebook platforms, where they have their own little groups that they're entirely dedicated to spreading right-wing vitriol, but they call themselves, the Patriots, or American Patriots, or something like that group. And instead, what they're doing is putting together a lot of the false information and false photos and false videos. So these are really, I think, incredibly big problems that we're going to face. And what that will end up being, and I hope it isn't, but I think what it will end up being is that first, a lot of people won't vote, that they also will just stay kind of the way it has been traditionally, with a much lower vote that keeps people away from the polls because of their feeling of disenfranchisement or distrust. But this is what I see coming on the horizon. And I'm very happy. I'm kind of at almost half an hour or so, and I'm happy to take everybody's questions. And I also apologize. I've always tell people when I start talking about money in politics, I say, this is not going to be fun. It's not entertaining. But one thing that I did want to also raise, not just in, I mean, all of these issues, because this is a group of women and I'm a woman running for office. And we talked a little bit about this before I was going to speak today about the impact really on women and minorities of this. And it's not just that women and minorities are targeted to not vote. Women and minorities are targeted for people not to vote for them. And as it is, women have a much harder time running for office in all levels of government than men do still. I mean, there is still a much more difficulty for women just across the board to get support from the establishment, to be able to raise money. But in fact, a lot of what happens with women in public office is that they, more than others, and I can't speak personally about this, but I'm speaking across the board, that women in public office are subject to much more vitriol online when they run for office than male candidates do. And so for we women, and those of you wonderful men who are also in the audience, and I'm not saying this is just out of my own self-interest, I think that women need to be supported to be able to run, because there have been many studies about women in public office, and now a lot of conversation. You might have seen it in the New York Times, but a lot of conversation about the women who are leaders of countries and how they're responding to the coronavirus. And those women have garnered a lot of respect worldwide because of their compassion, because of their sort of willingness to be straightforward and honest about the issues, and which is so important, I think, for people to maintain trust in government and trust in some of these rules and laws and regulations that we have to abide by. And if they're not explained, if they don't seem consistent, I think there's a lot of people who are chafing at them. And I think the way that women leaders have handled this throughout the world has garnered a lot of high marks because of the way that women govern. So I would say, you should take this to heart, because it is true that, and I know this happened in the primary, even the Democratic primary. I know that there was an enormous amount of online hatred spewed at the women candidates that did not get nearly that kind of response to the male candidates. So this still exists, unfortunately, in our country. So at that, I will open it up to everybody. That was on that was the happy note.
And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate the conversation, and I'm looking forward to questions from the audience. I'm going to let the audience know that I'll call on you and try to get to the question as quickly as possible so we can get as many questions answered as possible. I'm going to start with Esther. Esther, go ahead and unmute yourself, and then just be sure to mute yourself after you are done asking your question, and also be sure to lower your hand.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's so nice to be on here with you all. I wanted to just ask you, we in this area locally were micro-targeted last election when we had a proposition on the books that was for rent control, and we have candidates that have gotten large donations from PACs from out of state. And so I'm going to be launching my own micro-targeting campaign called #RentersVote. And my question is, how do you actually combat this? Because there's so much money behind it, and it's buried and it's hidden, and we've been able to find out some of them, and we call out the candidates, but there's so much more. And so this coming election compared to the last one, because it's a presidential one, the turnout's going to be so much bigger, that our focus is going to be to educate renters to combat those scare tactics. But I'm just wondering how else can we locally try and do something about this?
Right. And that's, I mean, thank you. You raise a really important point that people should know, which is that there is so much of this that's going on at the local level. And they have even done this in judicial races in California. I mean, races that are supposed to be, nonpartisan and independent, but they're not. So, I mean, the thing that is important, there's a couple of groups. One of them is the National Institute of Money and Politics. It's Follow the Money. And Follow the Money has worked very hard. I was on their board until I decided to run for office, but they work very hard to get even statewide and local, data on who's giving. So that is one thing. If people know about it, they get upset about it, and then they can be more active. And you can also try, I mean, PACs and others are supposed to provide information to the FEC and to the Secretary of State about what money they're giving. And it sometimes, one way that they do dark money is they'll give the money right close to the reporting period. And so they don't actually disclose it at the reporting period, which is another way that they accomplish dark money, because while they report, it's too late.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened with a couple of our candidates for council.
Right.
And then, of course, they bombard the and the average person doesn't have the time to dive into this and figure out. So the scare tactics is what really, gets. And so
Right.
I mean, I'm going to research my own micro-targeting to try and find a way to combat it. But it just seems, it's almost, you feel defeated when you see how much of it is out there.
I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I have to say, just personally, in my race, the two people, the one who I'm in the runoff with, as well as the one in the who I beat, actually, she had $1,500,000 from oil companies as IEs, and and had not raised that much, hardly any money on her own. She just had independent expenditures that did ads on her behalf every single day. And I think that it's really important for people to try to try to get on top of it. I mean, if you see too much activity like that, that should be a cue for people to start looking and try to delve into it to figure out where it's from, because I definitely agree with Kate. Although we talked about dark money is terrible, but I will say the influence of, whether it's dark or not, the influence of that much money on public policy is ridiculous, and it's just a really a bad thing for our democracy. So definitely, that's for a whole other day, but that's when I have my haircut, and I'll come back and tell you about what we need to do to fix the campaign finance system. But definitely, I appreciate your concerns. There's a question in the chat room too that I
Yeah,
just
let's go to that question in the chat room.
Okay.
I'm just going to expand on it a little bit, because there's two parts to it. One is whether or not the information that we get from journals and magazines, sort of the mainstream media, is more authentic or more likely of being authentic. And then Karen is also asking to what extent traditional journalists are being influenced or deceived by false information that is perpetuated on social media.
Right. It's a really interesting question. I mean, I would say that most of the major newspapers and KQED or NPR, most of those are really conscious of their journalistic ethics and do their best to fact check and to do it appropriately, which is not to say that they don't make errors. I mean, we know, for example, in the 2016 election, that the New York Times actually printed a very long article, and it related to Hillary Clinton's emails. And that was something that we know was stolen from, it was stolen, and a lot of it was not true. And so they've admitted it since. But so we should always be we should always read everything with a little bit of skepticism, always, I think. And if it's something that just doesn't seem right, then we should see what we could do to just Google it and check out other sources. I will say I actually have a funny story about this, because I wrote an op-ed in the Chronicle about the protecting democracy from the infodemic, which is what the World Health Organization has called the false information about the coronavirus. And I was talking to my husband, and he said, well, did you hear that Trump has said that you can use Trump vodka to prevent the coronavirus or something? And I said, really? Is there a Trump vodka? I don't believe that. And I Googled it, and there was a Trump vodka, but I think it hasn't been in production for 10 years or something, or quite a long time. So that was clearly false. And so, I think it can be on both sides for sure. So we've got to, be thinking all the time. But I would say clearly on Facebook, on those other media, I mean, this almost seems antiquated now, but we have to remember, for example, what was said in the 2016 election about how Hillary's campaign was molesting her babies in the basement of the pizza parlor in DC, and that guy went with his gun to shoot him up. Well, that was in the form of a newspaper article. They made it look like it came from some newspaper in the Midwest that didn't exist, actually. And so they were emulating it, and people believed it. And it's very interesting because this is the nature of social media, because that's the way that they try to get the attention of everybody. The people saw it, believed it, and it got, you know, millions of people that watched it. And then a couple of, after it was discovered, there was a fact check, and I think it was the Washington Post that posted, you know, this is false. And their rebuttal of it got about 100 or 200 likes and people who forwarded it. So people on the platforms do tend to be more attracted to things that are inflammatory, that are, you know, seem really, you know, upsetting. And that's what gets spread more than anything. So I think caution has to be even greater than it is, you know, for regular journalism. It has to be much greater on the internet.
I'm unmuting myself. I forgot I was muted. We have a question from Sharon Miller. Sharon, if you could go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, my question is about Epoch Times, because every time I go to watch a YouTube video, a little very nasty Epoch Times message or video comes out. How can I let YouTube know that I do not appreciate this and get these guys off of the platform?
Well, you know, I assume that, and you know, YouTube is owned by Google, right? Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So communicate with Google. YouTube is right up the street in Burlingame, I think, or somewhere in that neighborhood. So you should. There must be a way that there, if you Google and get there, you know, somebody there that you can complain to, and say, you need to deal with this.
I think that speaks to, though, how we are targeted. I'm not that familiar with the Epoch Times, but I came across an actual print version at a store one day when I was waiting for something that I ordered. And I can't remember the content of the article, but I remember being so blown away that it was just so patently false what was being published, and that it was in the format of a newspaper that looked just like, you know, it was sitting there alongside the Washington Post and the New York Times, and it was pure crap. So,
yeah. And that's what, you know, they are very good at deceiving people.
yeah.
Really. And there's much more of it now than there was. So I know it's terrible. And I do also I know that some of the journalists, there were some groups, and I know this was done with the Knight Foundation and others, and they were going to put something like a little T on things that said it came from a trusted source. But what they weren't going to say was whether or not the article was true or not true. And even trusted sources, I think people need to be somewhat skeptical of that.
Let me build upon some of the questions that have been asked and ask you a question about the different, you know, why is it that the standards are different for social media when you're engaging in some of the same activities in terms of publishing news, and then the same goes for when you are promoting candidates?
Right.
What are the factors that come into play that make it impossible, for whatever reason, for us not to be able to hold Facebook accountable in the same ways that news sources are held accountable?
Yes, well, there's a couple things. One of them is, and a lot of people have talked about this, there is a law, it's part of the Communications Decency Act, that was passed even before there really were platforms. There weren't any. It was just sort of at the start of the internet. And there's a provision, it's called Section 230. And 230 gives total immunity for the platforms as if they are just sort of a pass-through. And when in fact they're not, because we know that they already are looking at content. And that was one reason, I mean, seriously, when the Congress wanted the platforms to help them to deal with child pornography, they fought back and said, no, we have no immunity, we have total immunity for this, we shouldn't be responsible. They finally got enough pressure that they said that they would do it. And the same thing was done for sex trafficking and for, you know, issues related to women's abuse. And they, for many years, fought back on that and finally agreed to it. I think the other reason I will say is that our system, because when I was on the Federal Election Commission, I spoke about this issue because I knew that more and more campaigning was going to the internet. And one of my fellow commissioners went on Fox and Friends twice to proclaim that I was personally going to shut down the internet and that I was part of the Chinese censorship board. And as a result of that, as I think I mentioned to you, I got thousands of death threats and misogynist type threats. And that is because there's a really big sense that, oh, the internet, it has to be free, it has to be wonderful. But really what nobody contemplated was that it's now being used to destroy our democracy. And that is really so important that we need to have it, but there is not the will. And there were some, the Honest Ads Act was introduced by Amy Klobuchar, and also the Congress at the beginning of the year in 2019, they did HR 1, and it has some things about more disclosure on the internet, but it hasn't passed because McConnell is holding it up and won't do it.
So we have another question by Susan 9. Susan, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. Paula Pillow, it looks like we have you unmuted. If you can mute yourself and then.
I think I'm unmuted now.
You are, yes, Susan.
Hi.
Hi, thank you, Anne. I've really enjoyed your talk. I would just quickly like to say that I think one thing we can all do is get candidates like Anne elected. And I urge everyone to donate to our campaign. Anne doesn't know me, I don't know Anne. This isn't funded by dark money. I know that dark money is influencing elections, very small scale elections all over the country, as well as national elections very effectively. It spawned a whole industry. I wondered if you could speak briefly about how political money, dark money, originating in the United States is consciously being used to affect the outcome of elections on a global scale and changing the political climate of the whole world.
Yeah, well, certainly in the United States, what we know is that there is more money given from independent groups to candidates and in elections, particularly in the presidential elections, but all elections, than money that's given directly to the candidates by wonderful people like you. So we know that there's a predominance of that kind of influence, and the same with a lot, because it's dark money, we don't know the total extent of dark money, but what we do know is that a large percentage of it is dark money. Different countries in the world have different campaign finance systems. So in some cases, it's easier for them to be able to control things like this because there isn't so much of that. But I know, for example, in Mexico, there's not supposed to be any corporate giving. There's not supposed to be any direct. It goes directly to parties and things. But in fact, they know that this is now becoming the norm in a lot of other countries too. So it's having that impact, definitely. But we're the worst. We are by far the worst. We think we have the greatest political system in the world, but we actually do not.
Thank you.
I just have to reiterate what you just said. Having been a student of many other governments around the world who commit unspeakable atrocities, the fact that we are the worst when it comes to money and politics and what you just said is really shocking.
Mm-hmm.
Really shocking. We have another question by Paula Pillow. Paula, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Anne. Thank you so much. I have a question. It's a little bit larger about the role public financing of campaigns might play in mitigating some of these issues. And the reason why I bring this up is we just locally in Marina passed a campaign finance reform. And it was extremely difficult to navigate. There were many, many different interests, and some people saw it as disempowering women and minorities. Some saw it as empowering. There were special interests, whether it was a business group or a union. And so my question to you has to do with whether or not you see a role of public financing of campaigns helping to level that out and the difficulty there is in navigating to something like that, and if it could be used for ballot initiatives as well as candidates. And that's my question.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I particularly as a candidate, I will say the only answer is public financing of campaigns, and in many ways it would probably not be. And people object, and I don't know how they did there, but people object because they say, well, you know, we don't like politics anyway. We don't like politicians. Why would we give public money to them and the like? But the number of different public financing schemes that have worked really well. For example, in Seattle, they have democracy vouchers that they just give money to people to contribute. And that has actually increased the number of minority candidates and women candidates and increased the number of people elected. So that are women and minorities. And other states have matching. New York has a 6-to-1 matching program. So there's a lot of programs that have been pushed through at the state levels. That Maine also has one that, you know, have been very effective. San Francisco itself has that kind of program for local government races. And I think it would work. The only problem, the caveat is it doesn't impact independent expenditures because those are constitutional according to our present US Supreme Court. And so it's not going to stop that kind of money coming in to campaigns. But I still think that it's worth doing because it makes certain candidates and measures much more viable. I mean, I know, I have to say, it shocked me when I first started running that people said, oh yeah, well, I'll endorse you if you're viable. And I said, what do you mean? I've been at every level of government, blah, blah, blah. No, viability has to be with how much money you've raised. And it's all that. It's an endless cycle. And I think it's a really bad thing.
I agree. We have time for one more question. Is there another question from the audience before we wrap up?
There was one quick one that I'll answer, and that is in the chat. Yes, there are other countries besides the United States that are politicizing COVID information. Brazil is a perfect example of that because Brazil has Bolsonaro, who is the um, Brazilian equivalent of our president, and they are doing the same thing, and they have a lot of this information as well that is online. They use WhatsApp a lot, and so it's kind of a more secretive kind of platform, which people then believe it's true because they think it comes from their friends. So it's just as bad.
So Anne, I've pulled up your website. Thank you. Just so everybody has it, it's very straightforward, and I'll write it into the chat. Ravel4ca.com. So ravel4ca.com, all spelled out. I'll have Lisa just pop that into the chat if you don't mind. While I just say thank you so much, both to Anne and everyone who has participated with us today. As I mentioned before, this was our pivot into moving our programming online. I know there were some difficulties for some folks getting on, and we will fix all of that for the next time. But Anne, you were our guinea pig for this, and it was perfect. And I really do encourage everyone to please visit your website and continue to support you. We will support you if it's helpful. We will support you in any way we can. And it's just so important that we have women elected officials who are, who share our values in Sacramento. So thank you so much on behalf of everyone at the Democratic Women of Monterey County. Thank you for coming out today. And we hope to stay in touch with you. And when the shelter in place is lifted, we hope you'll come and join us for a live event.
I would love to. And then I'll have my hair cut.
Yes.
Thank you all so much.